Hi, I'm Lance Humphreys. I'm the Executive Director of the Mount Vernon Place Conservancy. Welcome to Flower Mart. The winemaking industry in Maryland has really blossomed, and we're thrilled to have Old Westminster Winery with us to walk you through a sampling of their wines. We know you're going to enjoy this.
Thanks, Lance, and thank you all for joining us. Really excited to share some information about Maryland wine and about the wines themselves that we'll be trying. So if you've noticed that when you've received your wine, we'll be trying 3 different wines all in a can. So I'll give you a little background on ourselves, but in the meanwhile, feel free to pour yourself some of our first can while you listen to me talk about our history and some background, and then we'll get into the wines themselves. At any point during the show, please feel free to ask any questions on the side, and we'll get to them in between different topics. So, Old Westminster Winery has been around since 2011. We're a small family-owned company that's owned by 3 siblings that was started alongside their parents at the home that they grew up in just outside of Westminster in New Windsor. This was kind of a project that was put together as a way to preserve the land. So as all the kids went away for college, and they each specialized in different things, such as Drew, the oldest, studied business. Lisa, the middle child, did chemistry. And Ashley, the youngest, she did marketing. Eventually, before they kind of went their separate ways for their careers, they wanted to find a way to really preserve the land that they grew up in, and see if they could put the land to use agriculturally. So eventually they, as newfound wine drinkers, they thought, well, the wine industry in Maryland, there is some history of that. There's not a ton of amazing wine happening here yet. There's definitely some great stuff starting, but let's see if we can join that and make some amazing wines here. So eventually they all went to learn wine their own way in different parts of the world. So Drew traveled to New Zealand, where they specialize in Sauvignon Blanc. Ashley went to Argentina, and she learned how to make. They make a lot of Bordeaux blends there, and what they're really famous for are their Malbecs. And Lisa, the middle child, went to California on the West Coast and learned how to make Pinot Noir and Chardonnay in Sonoma. So with a little bit of a taste from around the world of how to, crack the door open and get a taste for that, they came back with a little bit of information and planted the vineyard, which was in 2011. So the home vineyard, which is 10 years this year, consists of Chardonnay, Albarino, Sauvignon Blanc, Muscat, Cabernet Franc, Syrah, and Merlot. So we grow all that, and we additionally work with other farmers throughout the state of Maryland to make wines. And sometimes we'll blend multiple vineyards. Sometimes we'll really highlight a grape from a certain vineyard. Kind of no rules. Today, what we'll be having is a little taste. So we'll have some single varieties and some blends. So if you have any questions about anything I just went through a lot really quickly, please let me know. Otherwise, we'll get started with the first one. So the Farm Fizz is what we're starting with. This is going to be a sparkling Chardonnay. Feel free to drink from a can, drink from a glass, and so you might be asking yourselves, why wine in a can? This is a question we had. I'm going to be doing it out of the glass just so I don't know, I can smell it more. Why wine in a can? We think to ourselves, when we're going for a hike, we're having wine in a pool. A glass is not really the ideal scenario. Here at home, this is great. There's only like a 10% chance I'll break the glass. But if I'm at a pool or I'm going hiking, it's a lot less ideal. So you can just throw your wine in your backpack, throw someone a can in the pool, and it's just perfect. Really easy. The cans are 12 ounces, so it's surprising, but each of these cans is a half bottle of wine, just about. So 12 ounces per can versus just about 25 ounces for a bottle. So people, for whatever reason, there's a kind of mm, um, a misconceived notion about cans, like this is going to taste metallic or it's not as high quality. It's the same exact wine that we put in the bottles. It just happens to go in a can, and technology's come a long way with canning, so there's no ill effects. Pool wine is my fave. Yes, it's on a hot summer day. It's perfect to be able to cool yourself on the outside and refresh with some wine. If you don't finish a can, how long can you store it? That's a good question. So there are can lids that you can put on top. It'll act kind of like a cork almost. So what's really happening if you leave the can open, if you don't finish it, you can put it in your refrigerator. It'll be good the next day, but what might happen is it might not be as effervescent as it would be right now. So if you've had a sip yet or you're looking, if you did pour it, you can definitely see some bubbles happening, some really small bubbles coming to the top. So if you're okay with a flat wine the next day, it'll totally make it into the next day. But ideally, they're best consumed or shared right away. So a lot of for the Chardonnay, I get a lot of citrus. It's really vibrant. It has like lime and orange and green apple and um, red apples. It almost has like a tart tropical fruit thing as well, like a pineapple core, not necessarily like the super juicy part of a pineapple, but more of like the kind of harder, more astringent part of the pineapple, and like a green mango. It just smells really refreshing. Yeah, so then you get that wave of bubbles that make it even more refreshing. And on the in the mouth, it's really that tropical fruit comes through even stronger and maybe a bit riper. And it has kind of like a zesty, like spiciness to it, like a bit of a ginger and spiced orange. It's really delicious. So I can't see anyone, so I don't know how fast people are going. So I just want to check in, make sure things are good, and when people are kind of ready, we can move on to the next wine. So either let me know or I'll give everyone a few minutes and we can move on. All right. So Paul asks, how did you choose the grapes that you grow? That's a great question. Um, so because we're newer in on the scene, I guess we have a bit of history to play with, or we have people did some science for us, and we have results to see. You can sample wines that exist. So Chardonnay, one of the probably the most famous white wine in the world. Um, so we definitely wanted to plant that as it's people really call it a chameleon grape. It's the winemaker's grape. There's so many different Chardonnays in the world, and they all are perceived so differently. In California, you can have incredibly oaky, buttery Chardonnays. In northern France, you have Chardonnays that are so minerally and dry and like perfect seafood wine, but it tastes nothing like a California Chardonnay. And you have kind of everything in between. We just wanted to see what Chardonnay in Maryland could do. So we've made a lot of different Chardonnays in a lot of different styles, and we're kind of fine tuning seeing what the best version of that is. We're still, every year, because we're so small and we're family owned, we can play around and figure out what we like to do. Um, so sorry, I just got stuck on Chardonnay for a while. Cabernet Franc is the red grape variety that we have planted. So being on the East Coast, we do have some limitations with our seasonality here. It is not as hot as California. It is a much shorter growing season as well. So California, incredibly famous for their red wines, especially Cabernet Sauvignon, which takes a lot of sun to get ripe. There is some Cabernet Sauvignon planted in Maryland. A lot of it, it's tough to get it right here. So what we have is Cabernet Franc, which is actually the parent grape variety to Cabernet Sauvignon. So we have Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc together as different varieties, and they cross-pollinated together and created Cabernet Sauvignon. So Cabernet Franc, what's nice about it is that on average, it ripens probably 3 weeks earlier than Cabernet Sauvignon. And as Maryland residents, you're all familiar that we have hurricane season that starts to come towards late September, which is also when we start to pick the grapes. So every week counts that time of the year. So if we can buy ourselves a couple of weeks, we'll take it. So Cabernet Franc has done really well. In general, white grape varieties ripen a lot quicker than reds. So our home vineyard personally is about 90% white grapes. We just have a little bit of those red grape varieties. We also have Albarino, which is a grape that's really amazing. It's grown in the northwest of Spain traditionally, in a cooler part of the world that has a lot of oceanic influence, and it's kind of rainy, it's kind of windy, it's a very green part of the world. And I'm not sure if we were the first people to plant it in Maryland, but I remember trying that in I think it was in 2014 is the first time I had Old Westminster's Albarino, and it's what really kind of put them on the map for me, and ultimately the reason I work for them now. Yes, I hope that answers that question. Megan Berman. Hi, Megan Berman. Good to see you again. Megan is amazing, and she works at Old Westminster along with myself. Lisa asks, what food to pair with these wines? So these are really versatile. For this first one, it's just really great by itself, but if you, I think this is really great with cheese. If you have some softer goat's milk cheeses, I think it's really just kind of perfect. The fattiness from the cheese with the freshness and the brightness from this wine just really pair perfectly. Just general cheese and charcuterie boards with fruit and all that is great. Ryan asks, are there any grape varieties that are native to Maryland or this region? Really great question. There are, one of which we planted on our second vineyard. So Drew, our oldest owner and vigneron, he's the one who manages the vineyards. He just planted, we just planted about 3 years ago, we planted his new farm that he moved to. And we planted an additional, so we planted 10 acres 3 years ago and an additional 5 acres this year. One of the things that we planted, his farm's in Clarksburg, Maryland, so about 30 minutes, give or take, south of Old Westminster. He planted a grape variety that's actually native to Clarksburg, Maryland, which is really amazing. And one thing, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but to give you one slightly deep in the weeds conversation is grape varieties. When you plant them, there was a louse, a bug that basically disrupted the entire wine industry called phylloxera. And this basically destroyed almost everywhere except for places with incredibly sandy soils or places like Australia that were so far away that this grape louse never made it there. Before, you would have a Chardonnay grape variety or a Cabernet Sauvignon grape variety, and you would plant it. it would be on its own regular roots, just like you plant a tree and it has its roots. What we have to do now, because of that, is that allows feasts on those European rootstock roots. So now we plant grape varieties grafted onto Native American grape varieties, um, and this makes the phylloxera does not eat Native American grape variety. So you can have your Chardonnay grown in France, but it's grafted onto a Native American rootstock, so that it literally can stay alive. This is all to say that this Native American grape variety that we planted, whose name is escaping me right now. Yeah, that's embarrassing. Well, it is planted on its own rootstock, which is it's really cool. Like I said, you can't really find it often. It's kind of a real point of emphasis, or it's a statement saying that you're growing in a really special climate or region where you're betting on your grape varieties beating the phylloxera. So yeah, great question, Ryan. All right, I assume everyone will be ready for our rosé. All right, next up, raw rosé. Then when we go through all three wines, definitely let me know what your favorites are. I'm really curious what everyone is enjoying the most. So raw rosé, this is going to be what is called a Saignée rosé. So we'll get a little bit in the weeds again, but not too far. So there are two ways to make rosés. There's the press method and there's the saignée method. So saignée is just the French word for to bleed. We'll start with this method. Basically, it's a byproduct of red wine making. When you get your grapes to make red wine, we'll harvest them and we'll usually crush them up, throw them into a tank to ferment, and then we have the juice and the skins all kind of floating around together. And we have what's called maceration, which is the extraction of the skins in the juice. So for the most part, red grapes, when you crush them, even just like in your hands, if you crush red grapes, the juice inside of them will be clear. So you can theoretically make white wine out of most red grape varieties. There's a couple red grapes that are called Tinteriors, which actually have red flesh, but those are pretty rare. If you've heard of Petit Verdot or Chambourcin, which is a grape variety that you see a lot around here, both of those are Tinteriors, so they do have red flesh. But basically, during this maceration process, after either 12 hours, 24 hours, at the winemaker's discretion, we'll do the saignée process or bleed the tank. So what this means is that in all of our winemaking tanks, at the bottom we'll have not a funnel, a little lever that'll open up. And this is typically how we drain and move wine in different tanks through a pump. But what we can do is drain some of that wine, maybe 10%, and it does two things for us. We get a stronger red wine, more concentrated, so there's less juice now in contact with the skins. So kind of a more potent thing. Imagine if you're making tea and you use more tea leaves or less water, that's going to create a stronger cup of tea or coffee for the coffee drinkers. So we employ a similar process for our red wine to kind of give it a little more body and intensity. The other plus of doing this is creating a rosé. So this is going to be a Saignée from a lot of different grape varieties, such as Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Chambourcin, and Petit Verdot. So this is really interesting. I get some like grapefruit. I almost get some kind of like a yeasty the yeasty richness, almost like a toasted brioche kind of flavor, really comes through a lot. And I get some like tartar red fruits, raspberry, cherries, almost a little like a fennel-y sort of spiciness. Yeah, more freshness continues on the palate. Those red fruits are really prominent. Red cherry, raspberry, almost some like red currant brambliness. It's really refreshing. Any questions from any of you guys? Just want to give everyone a second to kind of catch up, recoup before we move on. I don't want to rush anyone too fast. All right, nothing new, so we can we'll let everyone catch up for a second, and we'll move on to the next one. While we catch up, while everyone's finishing, we have I didn't describe the other process. So the press method, as opposed to the saignée method, really simple. You pick your grapes, and you know you're going to be making rosé out of them. So you pick your grapes and you crush them. You basically treat your red wine grapes as if they were white wine, and that very small amount of skin contact while it's getting pressed, that tiny bit of skin contact will give you a light color extraction, and that's how you get press method rosé. All right, and we have some food questions about the rosé. So what's nice about rosé is that it's really versatile because it kind of plays the line between a white and a red. This can kind of do the lifting in between. You can definitely pair rosé with like a grilled chicken in the summertime. This would be fantastic with that. Salads with a richer, fattier fish such as salmon. It would just really be fantastic. Even what I love is this with a margarita pizza. I think it's really a fantastic pairing. All right, and Heather asks, who designed our can labels? She really loves the labels. I'm glad you like them. So we have a artist that we work with. She is a Towson University graduate. Her name is Rebecca Smith. Um, she's done a lot of artwork around Baltimore. I assume everyone is from Baltimore or the Baltimore region in this tasting. You can see her artwork on display a lot. I know she's done well-crafted pizza, Dylan's Oyster Cellar. She's done a lot of work for, not sure where else, but she is on Instagram, and you can definitely find her on there. Rebecca Smith, yeah, she's great. This last can, one of my favorite pieces of art on this one is this little dog. Sorry, I have a bad glare, but we have what used to be our vineyard dog. His name was Hurley, and it's kind of an homage to Hurley. He passed a few years ago, but he was really an amazing dog. He was a wild man. He roamed the vineyard. He knew how to open every door by himself. He was just his own magical creature, and we really miss him. So it's really nice to see him on there. And onto carbonic. So just a note about all of our wines. You may notice that they're a little cloudy, they're hazy. This is definitely something that we don't go out of our way. We don't filter any of our wines, and we don't fine any of our wines. So fining and filtering are the two processes that kind of make wine crystal clear. And we choose not to. Our kind of ethos is to intervene, to take away as little as possible. Let the wines really speak for themselves. So fining is basically adding an agent, such as historically egg whites are very common, bentonite, which is a clay, um, or if you're familiar with Guinness, historically, I don't think they use it anymore, but historically Guinness would use a chemical called isinglass, or it's a naturally occurring chemical, and it's actually derived from, I believe it's fish livers or fish bladders. And basically, what fining does, it's these proteins that bind to things in the wine as it's in our tanks, and it binds to these loose proteins and settles them out. So that it'll create kind of a cake, a compressed cake at the bottom of the tank, and then you filter. You run the wine off of that, off of those lees or dead yeasts, and then a lot of people will filter their wine. So our wines are unfined and unfiltered, kind of leaving them a bit hazy. And what we think, it leaves more texture and more complexity in the wine. So on to carbonic. So carbonic is named after a winemaking process called carbonic maceration. So we discussed maceration a little bit with the last wine. And what we're adding this time with the carbonic part is basically it's intercellular a fermentation that starts within each berry. So we don't crush these grapes. We put them into a stainless steel tank, all on their own, just layering grape bunches on grape bunches on grape bunches. And they go in pretty gently, so they're not getting broken apart. Then you typically you'll use a lot of CO2 to kind of apply pressure, because CO2 is a dense gas, so it kind of compresses things and kind of locks things down even tighter. This will put pressure on the grape variety, on the grapes, and we will have a fermentation that starts inside each berry. There's yeasts all over the grapes in the vineyard, in our cellar. We just have natural colonies of yeast, and basically the fermentation will start inside each berry. Like we'll have micro fermentations until the point that the fermentation gets it's going fast enough that each berry bursts, leaving juice. Juice starts running down, and then you're having you go from no maceration, because each berry, the skins are on the outside and the juice inside, so you're not really having that maceration. But once it bursts, all those skins are loose, and the juice is flowing through. So this is going to be how we make this. So it's going to make a lighter, usually a lighter wine, because half of the fermentation happens inside each berry. So carbonic is a blend. Chambourcin does the heavy lifting here, along with the Bordeaux varieties, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, here again, as well as Syrah. So carbonic maceration, one of the aromas. So if you're familiar with Beaujolais Nouveau, this is kind of the most famous wine in the world that uses this process. It can give you kind of a banana-y or bubblegummy aroma. That's kind of a classic indicator of the carbonic maceration, which you can definitely find in this wine. Yeah, I definitely get like a banana-y aroma from this. This does see a little bit of oak aging, just like the red wines that we bottle. This sees 12 months in neutral French oak. So for oak aging, what a neutral oak barrel is basically it's a barrel that's been used enough times to tie it back to tea again, just because I think it's a really easy way to think about it. French oak is when you make a new barrel. So a barrel takes about 5 years to make. You cut the wood, you cut the tree down, you cut the wood up. The wood has to cure and age. So you cut it into those planks, and then it ages for 3-4 years and dries. Then it gets bent, and the rings get put on it to make that classic barrel shape. And then they get toasted on the inside. And there's different toast levels when you go. Different coopers like to do different things slightly differently. So Um, from there, when it's done, you have a new French oak barrel. This is when it's at its most expensive. It's brand new and it's ready to contribute a lot of flavor. Just like when you open up a bag of tea, that first time you use it, that it's going to be its most powerful, most intense. But also, like your tea, you can reuse it and continue to create additional extractions. So you'll have, after some wineries, especially in California, they just like whiskey, they can use a barrel one time, and they're like, we only want that new oak flavor. Now that it's been used once, it's not doing it for us anymore. It's not as aggressive, so they'll sell it. Um, at a point, people can continue to sell it, and barrels get cheaper and cheaper. They become fermentation vessels, or just aging vessels, where you do get that vanilla and baking spice characteristic. But when with a new oak barrel, that's when it's like full throttle. By the fifth time you make a cup of tea, you still get that tea essence, but it's not going to be nearly as intense. So oak kind of works the same way with that. So this is all neutral oak. So the oak shouldn't be kind of hitting you in the face. You shouldn't be getting like fresh vanilla beans or anything like that. Just more subdued kind of baking spices. So for the red one, it's on the lighter side. It's really easy drinking. The tannin, super smooth, mellow, not particularly strong. Um, this would go well with pizza as well, with pasta dishes, a red sauce pasta with some sausage. I think this would be really fantastic with. Yeah, this is interesting. It has a bit of a licoricey kind of aroma. All right, I wanted to open it up for questions again, if anyone has any questions. And in the meanwhile, I'll let you know about kind of what we're doing at our space. So we're about 45 minutes from Baltimore, give or take. And we have a tasting room where we are open on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. Um, we have plenty of outdoor seating. We've been doing all outdoor since the pandemic. One thing we're blessed with is plenty of space. So it's been great for us in a very tricky world to navigate. We're very lucky to have plenty of space and plenty of tables outside and fire pits to get us through. Um, so definitely come visit if you're interested in like what we're doing. We have we have two pizza ovens actually. We have a new pizza restaurant that we started in the fall with a really amazing chef. We work with all kind of like our ethos. We work with all local ingredients and craft some really amazing pizza. Um, so definitely come visit. We also do farmers markets. Today was the very first one. So we have an outdoor farmers market where we have coffee, flowers, a farm CSA, um, we have popcorn, all sorts of amazing stuff, as well as a normal kind of a curated market that is open throughout the weekend. But Sundays are kind of the most exciting day because a lot of the makers are actually there and can answer any questions you might have. Um, yeah. All right, a couple questions. So, how did I become interested in local wine? Good question. So, I started my first job kind of out of school was at a restaurant down in South Baltimore. Um, it was called the Wine Market. It was down in Riverside, kind of past Federal Hill, and I kind of started as a busser there and worked my way through the restaurant and learned. I've always had kind of I've always been interested in learning about kind of the intricacies and what makes things different. I guess first, when I was probably like 15 or so, I got really into tea, like what makes green tea, what makes black tea a black tea, what makes tea from China different from tea from India, and etc., which turned into a coffee obsession where I was hand cranking beans to make my own coffee in the morning, just to really like what makes Bolivian coffee different from Panamanian coffee, et cetera, et cetera. What's different about brewing in a French press versus a mocha pot espresso maker? What's different? What temperature differences? Just kind of got into the weeds of that. Eventually beer, and then took me into wine. And I was really lucky to work with really amazing people that would take me under their wing and teach me a lot about this amazing wine world that we live in. What got me onto the local side of things was, like I mentioned, I had that Albarino, which we have our newest vintage available now. That I had that Albarino, I think it was it was the 2014 Albarino. It was the very first release that Old Westminster ever did of it. And it really kind of blew me away. And that's as I was learning about classic Albarino grown in the northwest of Spain. Um, so it was just kind of really eye-opening for me. Additionally, my now wife works with, she's always been in the farming world, agriculture, and I started working at a local farm in Sparks, up north. I was just doing 1 day a week there while I was working in the wine shop. So the natural transition from wine and agriculture kind of logically led me to locally grown grapes. Um, and I guess it was serendipitous, but I had met the crew at Old Westminster at a tasting at the B&O Railroad Museum. It was kind of like a best wineries of Maryland tasting hosted there by the Maryland Winery Association. And I got to talking to Drew, the oldest owner, and just mentioned if you ever need people to work there, let me know. I was, young and willing to do whatever. And when I first started at Old Westminster, I actually worked the harvest. So less of the agriculture side and more of the assisting with the winemaking. So basically, once the grapes rolled into the cellar, managing all of that was a lot of fun and taught me a ton. Eventually, now we're a really small family operation, so we all kind of do everything. But mostly my role with the company now is managing the sales throughout the state of Maryland, as well as helping in our tasting room and doing some staff education and a little bit of everything because everyone helps with everything. Heather asks, do you suggest serving carbonic chilled or at room temperature? For me, I definitely suggest chilled. It kind of, because it's a lighter wine, lighter reds are, chilling them a bit highlights the characteristics. It creates this kind of symbiotic experience. Heavier reds, not so good chilled, because those richer, more voluptuous kind of experiences you get are dulled by the coolness. But when you chill a red wine like this, it highlights those brighter characteristics. And for me, that makes it perfect. All right. Well, that looks like all the questions we have for now. I hope I taught everyone a lot, or some, about Maryland wine and our vineyard. And I look forward to seeing you all at some point soon. Come visit our website. We have new releases. We typically release new wines with our wine club allocations every other month. If you love our wine and you want to join our wine club, feel free to check out our wine club page on our website. If you live in the state of Maryland, we will deliver wine to your house free of charge. All the details on there. Thanks for joining us today, and thank you for your time. It was great.